Good evening, everyone in India, and a very late good evening to people in China, and good morning to people who are joining us from United States. I, Ritika Gupta, Assistant Director at Impact and Policy Research Institute, welcome you to IMPRI Web Policy Talk, the State of Cities #City Conversation. I would like to welcome the moderator of our series, Dr. Soumyadip Chattopadhyay, who is Associate Professor of Economics at Visva-Bharati University, Santiniketan, West Bengal, and Senior Fellow at Impact and Policy Research Institute. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ritika. Well, a very good evening from Santiniketan. And as Ritika has already introduced this particular program, and on behalf of the team of the Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies at IMPRI, I again, from my behalf, I welcome you all to this #City Conversation series. This is the 16th episode, which we are actually having. And as we know that the urban governance is gaining importance because of the growing social and economic importance of cities all over the world. For China and India, this urbanization and development have become quasi-synonymous. Policymakers have been advocating for using urbanization as a developmental engine to facilitate nationwide economic growth. In both the countries, economic growth and a fast-growing population in the cities is putting pressure on urban resources, public health, education, infrastructure, and so on. So to meet these huge challenges, government at different territorial scales, private players, citizens, and civil society organizations, they're engaged. And consequently, in both India and China, the relations between state, market, and civil society are radically changing. And importantly, there are stark differences in both the scope and magnitude of urbanization, as well as the nature of governance reforms in the two countries. Urbanization has been much slower and more informal in India than in China. And also the city governments in two countries have varying degrees of authority, responsibilities, and fiscal resources. So when the city governments engage with different state, non-state actors, the significant variations in their entrepreneurial capacities determine the mode of the engagement, which actually in turn shapes the urban policy choices. For example, it has been observed that quite a sizable proportion of city dwellers live only in informal settlements, which are generally characterized by ambiguous land ownership and poor infrastructure. And the demolition of informal structure and encouraging the private players to rebuild the areas have largely dominated the policy responses of China. In contrast, in India, attempts have been made to resettle and rehabilitate the slum dwellers, but both the processes have resulted in noticeable inequities. And also participation, for example, in India, is structured in such a manner to embrace and legitimize the neoliberal vision of market-driven development, and they largely serve the interest and priorities of the upper and middle class population. In China also, one of the major challenges resulting from the focus of local governments on growth is the degradation of environment caused by widespread misuse of land, urban sprawl, traffic congestion, and pollution. Overall, I think it is crucially important to understand why the city governments in the two countries have made different policy choices to govern their cities in general. What are their implementation outcomes? How far these institutional arrangements meet the criteria for good governance? So answering these questions within a range of cities with distinctive processes and socio-political dynamics would undoubtedly enrich the very understanding of complexities and contestations of urban transformation in the cities of Global South. Now, the Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies at IMPRI, along with IndraStra Global and Citymakers Mission International, has launched a discussion series, this State of Cities #City Conversation. And in these talk series, we have been engaging with experts in urban and regional studies to understand the challenges of urbanization and making the cities sustainable and inclusive. And today we are honored and delighted to have with us Xuefei Ren, a professor of sociology and global urban studies at Michigan State University. Xuefei Ren is a comparative urbanist, and her work focuses on urban development, governance, architecture, and the built environment and global perspective. She is the author of Governing the Urban in China and India, published by Princeton University Press, and it came only in 2020. Urban China, Building Globalization, the Transnational Architecture Production in Urban China, published by University of Chicago Press. And she is working on a number of comparative projects on urban redevelopment, mega events, and culture-led revitalization of post-industrial cities. And she is a recipient of a number of distinguished fellowships and grants, including from the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, Andrew Mellon Foundation, and American Council of Learned Society. And today, Professor Ren will speak on urban governance in China and India, deconstructing the issues of land grabs, slum clearance, and war on air pollution. In fact, based on a new book, The Governing the Urban in China and India, she plans to discuss how the different styles of governance in the two countries have produced inequality and exclusion. And today also, we have a very distinguished panelist and discussions. We have with us Professor Kala S. Sridhar, who is associated with the Center for Research in Urban Affairs, Institute for Social and Economic Change, Bengaluru. We have Dr. Akshay K. Sain, who is the Joint Director, General Manager, and Fellow of the Human Settlement Management Institute, Housing and Urban Development Corporation, New Delhi. And we have with us Dr. Ziming Lee, who is the Assistant Professor at Wuhan University, Mrs. Saili Udas Manikar, who is the Senior Fellow at Observer Research Foundation, Mumbai. And I think we will be expecting Mr. Samir Unale, who is the Joint Commissioner, Department of Municipal Corporation, the Government of Maharashtra, and Professor Y.B. Chen, who is the Director of Taiwan Institute of Urban Planning and Chinese Cultural University, has not been able to join this talk due to these time differences, but he has sent his regards and wishes to Professor Ren and the talk. So once again, I welcome you all the panelists and Professor Ren to this City Conversation talk series. And it's now over to you, Professor Ren.
Okay, thank you. Good morning and good evening. Let me find my PowerPoint. Okay, well, thank you for the introduction, and also thank you, Arjun, for organizing the panel. So I've worked on the book for a very long time, almost 10 years, much longer than I expected. But this is the first time I'm giving a talk about the book to a primarily Indian audience. So I'm very excited, and I will keep my talk very brief, and I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. I've had many stories when I was working on the book, and at the Q&A, feel free to ask anything. If you're interested in what happened last night in Washington, D.C., feel free to ask too, not related to the book. Anyway, so let me start with a very brief overview of some of the major trends of urban growth or urbanization in both countries. There's a number of major differences when we look at how the two countries have urbanized. For China, the big story is migration. In 2020, more than 60% of China's population lives in cities, according to the census. So the urban population growth has been driven primarily by rural to urban migration. And China has almost 300 million migrants. Most of them are rural to urban migrants. And the picture you are seeing now is Guangzhou train station. So every year, around the time of the Chinese New Year, most migrants would travel back home. So the Guangzhou train station is a symbol of the magnitude or the volume of migration that has been happening in China for the last 30 to 40 years during the whole duration of the market reform. And another mechanism that drives urban population growth in China is less well known, which is reclassification of rural places as cities. So for example, the picture I'm showing you here is one of my fieldwork sites. It's a very small place. I think most people in China don't know about the place. It's a rural county called Lufeng. Until the end of the 1990s, the place was rural in terms of its administrative status. But in the year of 1999, Lufeng County was promoted as a city, as a municipality. So when that happens, then everybody living in the county was counted as urban for the next census. So all over the country, there are many, many places like Lufeng, which have changed their administrative status from rural to urban. And some geographers estimate that between 15 and 20% of China's urban population can be traced to this change in administrative status. And in places like Lufeng, still many people work in agriculture, but that doesn't matter. For the census purpose, Lufeng is counted as urban, and everybody living here is counted as urban. So when we compare urbanization rates in China and India, so China is 60% and India is 34%. The comparison actually doesn't make much sense because the two countries have very different urban definitions used in the census. And for China, at least, the urban definition has been changed every 10 years for each census. But the big story is migration and then the reclassification of rural towns as municipalities. So these are the two main mechanisms driving China's urban population growth. For India, migration surprisingly is not the big story. So for urban scholars working on India, many of them argue that it is in situ urbanization, which means people are not moving, are not living, but the places where they live are changing as more and more people leave agriculture and take jobs in services and also manufacturing. So this is another place I studied for the book, which is Singer in West Bengal. It's a census town, which means for the census purpose, it's counted as urban. But in terms of governance structures, Singer doesn't have a municipal government. It's governed by a number of rural village councils. And the problem is, as all of you probably know this better than me, rural councils, village panchayats in India don't have the power to tax. And without taxation, there's very little revenue with which to provide services and also to build infrastructure. So one of the major challenges for India is probably the governance of these census towns. And some people estimate that at least 15% of India's urban population lives in census towns. So that's a huge challenge. How do you how do you manage urban affairs without local government? So that's a brief overview of the differences in the patterns of urban population growth. So for my book project, I was primarily interested in just one big question. What are the main differences in terms of how the two countries govern their cities? And there are many differences, of course. And my thesis for the book, so the one difference I wanted to highlight in the book is this territorial versus associational approach to urban governance. So for China, if you look at how cities, municipal governments approach things, how they make policies, how they implement policies, It's very much policy making and also implementation is strongly shaped by a very thick layer of local territorial institutions, such as the hukou system, also the system by which China promotes the local officials. And in the book, I give a number of other examples of local territorial institutions. For India, there's an absence of similar local territorial institutions, but instead, policymaking and implementation is very much contingent on coalition building among the public, private, also civil society sectors. So that's one major distinction I wanted to highlight in the book. And for the rest of the book, I looked at three empirical examples, three different policy issues. The first is slum redevelopment. And here I compare Guangzhou and Mumbai because both cities have a large amount of informal settlements. And then the second case is land acquisition in Wukan. Wukan is a small place in the Pearl River Delta. And I compared Wukan with the Singer. In both places, about a decade ago, there was a major land dispute, and the disputes and protests had serious consequences for both countries. And then the last case is environmental governance. And here I compared air pollution control in Beijing and Delhi. So today I'm not going into all the details for all three examples. I will just very briefly talk about housing and then maybe also a little bit on air pollution. So for housing, let me show you some pictures first. So here I'm looking at urban villages in Guangzhou and slum redevelopment in Mumbai. And the focus of the comparison is the politics of compensation. When the redevelopment of urban villages or slums takes place, who gets compensated and who doesn't? Where to draw the line between the eligible and non-eligible? For Guangzhou's urban villages, the compensation really depends on three very specific local territorial institutions. The first is hukou, and the second is rural land ownership, and the third is membership in particular urban villages. So hukou, that is obvious. If you don't have local hukou, then you are not entitled to not only compensation, but also many other social welfare benefits provided by the local government. But hukou alone is not enough to be eligible for compensation. Urban villagers need to have land ownership. So urban land is all public, but rural land is collectively owned by villages. And not all urban villagers have land ownership. And the third one is really interesting. It's membership in a particular urban villages. So this is probably something unfamiliar for the audience in India. So urban villages are informal settlements, informal in the sense that it's a lot of the buildings you see in the picture on the left, so they are illegal construction. People don't have the permit to build, or they build more than 3 stories. 3 stories is the limit, but to maximize rent, a lot of urban village landlords build higher than that, and so the construction is illegal. So in that sense, it's in the literature at least, urban villages are called informal, described as informal settlements. But urban villages are also shareholding companies. So for many villagers, they are shareholders. And at the end of a fiscal year, they receive dividends from the village company. And for every urban village, there's a company, and then the company manages different assets, shopping malls, cinema, parking lots, so they have property. So urban villages are also economic corporations, and villagers are shareholders. So only shareholders are eligible for compensation. And if you look at Guangzhou, the entitled urban villagers have been compensated very generously, and many of them have become millionaires and even billionaires from compensation. So once their property is demolished, they are very well compensated if they have these three things: local hukou, and then rural land ownership, and also membership in urban villages. So that's what I mean, how these local territorial institutions matter a great deal in the Chinese context. For Mumbai, the slum redevelopment is a very different story. So eligibility is based on just one arbitrary cutoff date, January 1st, 2000. If people can prove that they've lived in their community for the last 20 years, then they are eligible. However, the date is not inflexible, so the date can be negotiated between developers, residents, and state bureaucracies. So that's the story for redevelopment of urban informal settlements. And another case I looked at is air pollution control in Beijing and Delhi. And this is probably an even better demonstration of the difference between the territorial and associational approach to urban governance. Both Beijing and Delhi are heavily polluted, and both cities are trying very hard to improve air quality, but they have very different approaches. For Beijing, not only Beijing, all over China, it's quite homogeneous in terms of the way they try to reduce air pollution. So the main strategy is called target responsibility system. Target means every city, every province has a time-bound pollution reduction target. For example, reducing PM 2.5 level by 40% in the next 3 years. So that's a target. If the target is unmet, then local officials will be held responsible. They will not get promoted. And in some cases, they will probably be demoted, punished. So why do I call it territorial? It is territorial because the local officials are held responsible, but only within their own jurisdiction. So for the city of Beijing, the officials are under high pressure to reduce air pollution, but there's no incentive to collaborate with nearby heavy polluting provinces. So in the long term, the target responsibility system is not going to work because to really make the air clean, Beijing or any city, they have to collaborate with nearby cities. They can't be only looking at what's happening within the city boundary. And here for China as a whole, the main actor is municipal government. The governments decide policies and they are responsible for implementation. Environmental NGOs are visible, but they are the things they can do are very limited. So that's a major difference from India. In the case of Delhi, the government, I would say in the last 2 or 3 years, the Delhi government has become more proactive. But if you take a longer perspective, if we look at what has been happening in the field of environmental governance over since the early 1980s, the Delhi government is not that visible. It didn't do anything in the 80s and in the 1990s, even in the early 2000s. And here, the main actor is environmental NGOs. There's a number of very powerful NGOs, and they've been trying to mobilize the Supreme Court, the Delhi government, different central and state government agencies, and also private industries. So it's almost the opposite of China, where for Delhi, it's the civil society sector that has played a really instrumental role in reducing air pollution. So now, since we are living under a pandemic, so I'm going to share with you an example, not from the book, an example related to COVID-19. It's an example of perfect example of China's territorial approach to, in this case, managing the pandemic. So compared to the rest of the world, China has done pretty well in keeping COVID-19 infections under control in both cities and also the countryside. And one of the main strategies China adopted is called the grid governance system. So for cities like Wuhan or any city in the country, the city is divided into many, many small cells, and every cell is called grid. In Chinese, it's called Wangge. And for each cell, it's about probably 1 or 2 square kilometers. For each cell, there are multiple people from the local government, the local court, universities. So there are all kinds of people who are appointed by the government, municipal government, and they are assigned as volunteers to be responsible for contact tracing and quarantine. If they find people infected, then they would send those people to different quarantine centers. So the system has worked very well. And the picture, I have 2 images here. The picture on the left is my colleague Li Zhigang at Wuhan University. He's the dean of the School of Urban Planning at Wuhan University. And he texted me this image in late April, right after Wuhan lifted the lockdown. So he was assigned as a grid manager for the campus, a part of the Wuhan University campus. And he told me that his job as a grid manager was to stand on the street corner and tell people to keep their masks on in late April, early May. So at that time, people still need to wear a mask outside. And then the form on the right is a list of faculty members in the School of Social Science at Wuhan University with their names, personal phone numbers, and then the very specific boundaries of the grid for which they were responsible for, and also the number of households living in each grid. So the grid governance system is another example of China's territorial approach to governance. It's basically a divide and rule strategy. A city is divided into many, many small units, and then the local government would assign people from all kinds of organizations to for surveillance purpose. So every residential building has probably multiple people in charge. So that's one of the consequences of the pandemic. The level of surveillance, both digital or human surveillance, has increased so much. So people's every move is being watched in different ways. So this is not from the book, but I thought I would share with you the example just to highlight the very distinctively territorial logic or territorial character of urban governance in China. And then just summarize, there are many differences between China and India. And when people compare the 2 countries, it's very easy to jump to the conclusion that the regime types are different. China is not democratic, and India is democratic, and therefore things work differently. I don't dispute the power of regime types. It does explain a lot of variations. But in the book for this project, I was trying to convey the message that regime types don't explain everything. And for me, I was interested in examining, for example, for the Chinese case, how a high capacity and non-democratic country or regime operates at the local municipal level. And the main insight I reached is this very territorial logic in the manner in which the Chinese state manages urban affairs. And for India, I didn't see that. And instead, the main insight is contingency, a very flexible or fluid situation where alliances or networks are made and unmade, and depending on the different associations or relationships among public, private, and civil society sectors, urban policies are made and get implemented very differently. So I'm going to stop here, and I really look forward to hear your feedback. Thank you.
So thank you, Professor Ren, for your presentation. So it's really enthralling kind of thing, and as you rightly mentioned that generally while comparing the urban governance between China and India, generally there has been emphasis on distinction of regime type and state capacity. And as you mentioned, the reason is simple: China is not democratic and India is, and China is a high capacity state and India is not, while India is not. But you drew your attention to the territorial form of approaches. Like the Chinese state is also territorial in the way actually it governs its cities and the society as a whole. For example, you mentioned about the governing techniques such as the hukou system or the rural collective land ownership, the membership in urban villages, and also mentioned about the way China promotes its local officials based on its performance within one's jurisdiction, and how all these institutions are actually defining rights and responsibilities according to the administrative jurisdiction, and then ultimately shape the urban policy making. And in contrast, if we look at the Indian case, as you rightly mentioned, that much of the urbanization is actually happening informally, with neither the provision of adequate infrastructure nor the presence of strong municipal governance structure. For example, you mentioned about the in situ rural urbanization in the form of census towns, which roughly accounts for, as per the last 2011 census, around 30% of the urban growth. And these limit the households' access to the urban services, and also the conditions are likely to limit the improvement in broad-based developmental outcomes. And you rightly mentioned that the Indian system reflect a strong associational logic, like where different stakeholders, they are actually forming alliance to govern the cities. And the distinguishing feature of the Indian cities is its lack of strong city governments. In fact, what I can add is that in India, we can see that there has been an attempt towards decentralization and the adoption of a set of institutional and policy reforms to improve the governance. For example, there has been emphasis on cost recovery, there has been emphasis on financial self-reliance, privatization, commercialization of infrastructure, and so on. But in reality, this decentralization can at best be described, at least in the Indian case, as incomplete, and there are also institutional fragmentation, and all these created a kind of a vacuum of power at the city level. And of late, we have been seeing that the real estate developers, the corporate actors, the civil society organizations, the private consultants, they are actually playing an increasingly important role in deciding the future urban development trajectories in India. So really, what I also think is that in case of India, the key question is which surely require much more research. That is how the Indian cities are transformed through the spatial imaginaries and modes of controls, regulations, governances, which are actually shaped by the interactions among these different multiscalar actors. So once again, thank you for your presentation. So just we have a very eminent panelist or discussions among us. So let me just quickly request first Dr. Akshay K. Sen, if you sir, please have your comments or observation on what Dr. Ren has presented or discussed. It's over to you, Dr. Sen.
Thank you, Professor Chattopadhyay. I must compliment Professor Ren for an excellent presentation, giving just an overview of India and China urban governance issues. So though they are not exactly the same, as you already pointed out, and Professor Soumyadip has already mentioned. So just one kind of input or you can say observation from your presentation is that you said that in India it's mostly in situ urbanization, but our migration is not kind of an issue, but this is actually is not correct, you know. So in Indian case, it is something around as per the census. Though it is a 2011 census, it is something around up to 28% at the rural to urban migration in India. And it's a huge number if you compare the India's population. And this may not be the case in other countries in the world, but in the present COVID situation, and this became evident that the migrants, in fact, the backbone of the urban economy, you know. So migration is one of the important kind of tenets of urbanization. You know, Indian urbanization is defined in different ways. You know, World Bank says it is messy urbanization, and some others say that it is uneven urbanization, it is haphazard urbanization. So what may be, but yeah. So in situ is I mean. Significant portion, but migration is also very important in that context. And just to support and complement what Professor Chattopadhyay just emphasized about the governance, who governs actually in India. So this is a kind of paradox in our country. You know, the governance and management of the urban areas in India particularly is very complex, and with a number of institutional structures, you know, which often have overlapping responsibilities, as Professor mentioned. You know, state governments who have the kind of the principal responsibility of urban development, like have been deficient in providing or building capacities for urban infrastructure, affordable housing, even providing access to kind of let's say improving conditions of the slums, you know. And also on the other hand, ULBs are not sufficiently empowered, you know, as Professor Chattopadhyay also mentioned, to deal with these challenges either, you know. So in spite of having a legitimate legislative framework, the decentralization, this 74th Constitutional Amendment Act. So therefore, the institutional structure needs further strengthening and kind of improvement for meeting the emerging challenges. But having said that, in the last, let's say in last 6-7 years, you know, a lot of reforms have taken place in the urban space, urban governance space, like the e-governance. There are a lot of emphasis on smart cities, smart governance, digital economy is growing. And then the single window clearance system is happening in Indian urban areas. And then the double entry accounting system, which gives the more, enabling the ULBs to be fiscally empowered, to raise resources for their functions, And then there is also the audit, energy and water audit system, and also the social audit system. Then another important thing is the optimality in the land use and land utilization, which was not there previously, So we have a new land acquisition acts and so many things. And also the capacity building in the urban, So there are separate municipal cadre is now in many states like Rajasthan and others. They are also having municipal cadres, to have a specialized municipal administration. So the governance system is changing. That's why being in the housing ministry, last 4 or 5 years, we have, I think, the Minister of Housing and Urban Affairs has carried out something around 30 to 40 reforms. So that is why if you see our ranking in the ease of doing business in the World Bank's ranking, it has significantly improved. Just to highlight one aspect, that India was, I think, 183rd in the construction permits in 2017. Now it has come down, I think, around 67 or so in the ranking system. Similarly, the overall ranking has also come down from 140 or odd to now it is around below 50. So that is because of these reforms in the urban governance. So, but of course, much more need to be done, and we can also emulate the best practices from the Chinese context as well. So I think let me stop here.
Thank you, Dr. Sen. Dr. Ren, since I also have to go, would you like to just comment on some of his thoughts? Yes, please.
Yes. Well, it's so on migration, I agree with you. I think India probably has more regional variations. Probably every state has a slightly different story, and China is more homogeneous. But even for China, there has been some change in the migration flows. So in the last, I would say, 4 or 5 years, migration has slowed down because for different reasons. A lot of smaller towns, 2nd tier, 3rd tier, 4th, 5th tier cities have more job opportunities. So a lot of young people don't want to leave or travel that far from their hometown to get a higher paying job. And also for the top tier cities, Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, they have very strict population control policies. And also the living costs are so high. So it's prohibiting for new migrants to enter. And also the demographics has changed. The country is aging. There are just not enough migrants anymore. But I agree with you that we shouldn't dismiss migration. That's a big story for urban India. And it's and thank you for telling us about the new like 30 different new reform initiatives that have been happening over the last 6-7 years. Last year, so over the years, I've met many Indian, not scholars, but like people, young Indian professionals studying at various schools at American universities, and a lot of them are on government scholarship. So they have to return, and a lot of them want to go back and then take a position in local municipal governments. So I met a brilliant young man last year at Princeton, and he's going back. He's doing a PhD in environment and public policy, and he's going back to Rajasthan. And when I talked to him, I just felt, wow, if these people can go back to India, then the situation can change very quickly. To empower local municipalities, the first thing is you need people, talented people. So, and I see that is happening. A lot of people they have a lot of international exposure, and then once they go back to India, they will use their knowledge and skills to make things happen. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Professor Rani. Yes, you have rightly pointed out, like this is a classic problem of this decentralization initiative, because I often mention this particular one particular assumption that that in the context of or not in the context of developing countries, most of the state governments, they do not know what to do, and when we come to the local government level, then local governments, they do not know how to do. So that's why this capacity building is very much important. And you really mentioned some of the positive scenario, like talented people, they are coming back to India to serve the local government. So it's really an encouraging feature. So thank you once again to Dr. Sen as well. So now let me now request Professor Kala S. Sridhar, if you please come in and make your presentation, make your observation or comments. It's over to you, Professor Sridhar.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Soumyadip. And I would like to thank IMPRI, Dr. Arjun Kumar, and also Dr. Soumyadip Chattopadhyay for this opportunity to discuss Dr. Xuefei Ren's book. This is because coincidentally, I was requested by the University of Macau to review your book, Xuefei, for a journal. So I have read through the book. So it was very, very coincidental that they requested me to discuss this book. And very interestingly, I was impressed. I was really impressed with your detailed knowledge of India in addition to China. And your narrative style is very, very engaging. It's all in first person, and it's based on ethnography, case studies. So I really enjoyed reading through the book. And basically, you take the cases of land acquisition, slum clearance, environment comparatively. And what I wanted to actually first point out is that you look at Beijing and Delhi for air pollution, which is quite on the dot, and you look at Wuhan and Singur for this land acquisition. And the one I don't understand is for the slum clearance, you look at Guangzhou and Mumbai. See, I think Guangzhou is significantly smaller than Mumbai. Guangzhou, I think, is about 13 million, 1313, whereas Mumbai is about 25 million. So population, right? So I think that Guangzhou and Mumbai slum redevelopment may not be exactly comparable to each other. And now what I want to come to is the fact that you rightly point out, Ren. I'm really again impressed, very impressed that India is very conservative in its definition of what is urban. And we really look at three criteria, all of which have to be satisfied for a place to be urban, right? So, actually, in some related work, I find that if India were to relax it, one of its criterion, then it could be 69% urban as of 2011 if its definition were more liberal, right? Uh, but on the China side, Ren, I did notice actually this is not there in the book. I think it is there in the book. And you also nicely showed me a picture of this Lu Feng, right? A lot of rural places being redesignated, reclassified as municipalities, right? That is actually one in the rush towards urbanization. In the rush towards urbanization, I think you have missed out one major aspect of Chinese urbanization. I think which this Shepherd 2015 points out. Basically, it is the ghost city phenomenon, right? This is the ghost city phenomenon because of unbridled lending by UDICs. They are basically, I'm sure you know what they are, the Urban Development Infrastructure Corporations, which are special purpose vehicles to which the state run China banks lend in an unlimited, unbridled fashion, and their primary job is to build infrastructure in the cities. And they, in this rush towards urbanization, you basically can't find enough people to come and live in those apartments, right? So this is called as the ghost city phenomenon, and there is an oversupply of infrastructure, and basically which are vacant and unused, and the uncontrolled lending by the state run banks in China to UDICs has led to the creation of huge debt in China. So that is one thing I think that you have actually missed out. So now the other part is that you make some very nice comparative uh, comparisons across land development in the two countries. And one thing is that you argue very persuasively that the informality of urban villages in China stems from illegal construction, right? Rather than from unclear land ownership. Right. So you showed us some pictures of the same in your presentation, and so you make the point that urban villages have a buoyant rental economy through the construction of apartments, but which would have to be compensated at the market rate if they are renovated. So they are not renovated at all, right? So this is actually very similar to one phenomenon in India cities, the one aspect of land use regulation called as the floor area ratio. It's called the FAR or FSI. So uh, the floor area ratio actually is very, very conservative in India cities, which means that it is very, very low compared to cities in China or the United States or Singapore and things like that. So what happens is that in Mumbai, is there anyone? Our Mr. Samir Unhale is there, so he'll be able to tell you this. So in Mumbai, it's a very, very interesting case of land use regulation in India, where the FSI, the floor space index, actually declined over time. So, which means that anybody who wants to redevelop an ancient building, right, in the center of the city, cannot do it without losing additional FSI, right? When a particular building was built in 1980, it was like the FSI permissible was like 4, right? So you can build 4 floors on a plot of 100 square foot of plot area, let's imagine. But when it declines over time from 4, the FSI, to about 2 or 3, you, if you demolish that building, you will lose those 2 floors and you can build only lower, right? So a casual onlooker will think, why is this beautiful building not renovated, right? That is, however, not done because the developer will lose the additional FSI which was permitted earlier. So because of which they are not renovated at all. So this is very, very similar to what you're describing, that in China, a lot of these apartment buildings are not renovated because they have to be compensated at the market rate. Right. So that is actually one exactly analogous comparison with India's land use regulations, which I thought was noteworthy of being pointed out. Now, the other thing is, dear Zufai, I found that, I mean, you are very, very right in this urban environmental governance, that in India, basically the associational form of this governance takes the form of this going to a public interest litigation to the Supreme Court. Okay, and in China it's territorial. You're very right. I'm very impressed with this. Is everyone able to hear me? Yes?
Yes. Yes, we
Okay,
are
okay,
listening. Yes.
right.
Yes.
Okay, okay, okay. Because I think one thing that I would like to point out, Zufai, is that in a democracy like India, it is public opinion that drives environmental protection, whereas in China, it is economic efficiency that drives this thing. So I think you say this very interesting things, but I think this is actually kind of lost in the details of the book. But you have to note that, yeah, the Supreme Court is supreme, and environmental activism by civil society organizations has actually taken this very far. And you should note that India has a sound legal system with advanced public interest litigation, whereas its regulatory system is far less effective than that of China. I think, which is a minor detail, which is very important. I'll give you one example of this less effective regulatory system. See, you very rightly pointed out in your figure in the presentation that the central pollution control boards, the state pollution control boards all play a role in setting the standards for what is acceptable air quality, right? However, I think you also pointed this out, but there is a lot of thing into this, that the industry can actually influence the state pollution control boards on what standards they have to exactly set, right? So, for example, there is a certain level of PM 2.5 in the air that will give you an upper respiratory tract infection, but there is a certain other level of PM 2.5 that can give you just a cough. But both of them are equally harmful, okay, at some point. So, uh, so the industry can basically influence the state pollution control boards to say that you set the standard low, you make it 120, whereas even 90 can be very harmful for your lungs and your upper respiratory tract, right? So I think this kind of thing is actually probably it happens in China as well, right? But I think this definitely is missed in the case of India. And one other thing, Zufai, which I found was that you use primarily qualitative methods to make your points, which is fine, which is very very engaging. And I was fascinated, and I could not really drop the book down at all once I started reading it. And I'm really very very impressed. But what I noted was the conspicuous absence of references to a prominent work on China's environment by Cixi Zheng and Matthew Kahn. And that is also Princeton University book, Blue Skies Over Beijing. It's, I think, 2016 book. Yeah, it's 2016 book. So that is one conspicuous absence that I found. And also, I found the conspicuous absence of the framework such as the environmental Kuznets curve in discussion of the urban environment, right? The EKC as it's called. So that is employed very extensively for study of the environment in various countries, more so in the case of the US, China, and India. Now I actually read through the full book, as I said. So actually, Zufai, I did not understand the rationale for chapter 6. I think the book would have read seamlessly without it. So even without 6, I think it would have been really very good. That's what I thought. But I think there are many useful contributions of the book, and you rightly point out commonalities across the two countries. You say that all these environmental NGOs are so powerful in India, which is correct. And you say that politicians in both countries resort to short-term goals over long-term things which kind of fade away. Absolutely right. This is all public choice theory, right? So and in China too, Zufei, I found that your Indian, what is it called, sorry, Institute of Public and Environmental Affairs. The IPE is also very, very powerful, which is quite similar to the CSOs in India, right? That is one thing that I thought you missed. But one thing that I'm amazed about is what I should tell you is that you quote one thing from a gentleman in West Bengal, Dr. Soumyadip, also might recall this, that industrialists should be in the business of buying land directly from the farmers. The state should not be really mediating this, right? So actually, you know what, the government of Karnataka, of which Bangalore is the capital, the government of Karnataka has exactly come up with a land reform law that does exactly this, that industrialists can buy directly from the farmers without government interference. And also they have reduced the time for conversion of land from agriculture to non-agricultural use, which has actually led to a lot of debate and lot of unhappiness from farmers. But you're absolutely right, and I think you have a very state of the art view of urban and industrial development in both the countries, not only in China but also India. I think I'm really very, very impressed with your scholarship. Hearty congratulations on the publication of your book this year, and I hope you find these comments interesting or useful. Thanks a lot for this opportunity.
In fact, thank you, Professor Sridhar, for your elaborate comments. And since you have raised so many interesting points, so I think I request Professor Ren to respond to whatever Professor Sridhar has said, because there are so many points. I think you'll love to respond to them.
Thank you. First of all, I think definitely send me a review of my book. I would love to read. I'm taking notes while you were talking, and I just filled 2 pages. I don't think I have time to respond everything. So let me just pick one example, and I will send you an email later with more detailed response. So let's see, what's my favorite question on my list? Let me talk about ghost cities. You said that's one of the things I didn't discuss, and which is true. Ghost cities. There are so many. Ghost cities are interesting, but one thing I think we need to know is some of them are no longer ghost cities. They are filled. They are very densely populated. So some ghost cities, like Guangzhou in the middle of the country, it was probably the largest ghost city, or some people call it new town, 10 years ago, but now it's filled. It's just a normal. It's not empty anymore. But you are right that it's the incentive. What drives local governments to build is the infrastructure. If they build infrastructure, then it's quickly reflected in the end of the year GDP figures, and based on that numbers, local officials can get promoted. So it's not from, there's no rationality. If you look at, they're not trying to make a profit. Most ghost cities lose money, but for the politicians, the investment in infrastructure will look them very good, so they can get promoted. And there are almost no ghost cities in the south of the country. It's mostly in the north. It has to do with resource. A lot of ghost cities are coal mine, are located in provinces with a lot of natural resources, so they have extra cash. They don't know where to spend the cash. There's already a large literature on that. And thank you for reviewing my book and all I took very detailed notes. I'm going to send you an email later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Xuefei, for those detailed comments. And I look forward to, talking with you more. I think there is some more discussion, and then if there's a chance, we'll connect. And I think we are on a same panel discussion, maybe 2 weeks from now. No, on 16th. When
really?
yeah. from
check my calendar.
Dr. Martha Chen of Harvard Kennedy School is the moderator.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah,
So we will Okay.
definitely. Yeah, but I think we may have some more things to talk, but yeah. Thank you. That was really very interesting.
So, okay, thank you. So now just now I request Dr. Ziming Lee, because it's quite late, they're in China. So just to chip in and have your comments. Maybe I'd request to restrict your comments within 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you for all the answers and comments from Indian friends. And you gave me a very good information about the comparison between China and India. And I have a quick questions. The first is when we mentioned about slum clearance, and what is the outcome, like gentrification? And I'm thinking about the gentrification's impact on the urban resident, not only the slum dwellers, but also some people in the middle levels. Maybe the gentrification that happened could influence their housing affordability. So what's the consequence or the differences in the consequence of that between China and India? And the second is when we talk about the governing the urban in China and India, and what is the policy implications for both countries? It's the big question, but what is the practical policy improvement or something that two countries could learn from each other? Is there a kind of a social learning process that, you know, the two countries, people at the grassroots level, we don't know each other, and we have a lot of misunderstandings, and how the research and the academia can make some experience exchange happen and make it happen in practice.
Thank you. Both are.
So
yes.
Thank you.
I intervene. Can we have the observation of all the other?
Yes.
I think we are left with 2 more discussion panelists. So then, please you respond. Okay. So now I request. So just let me now request Miss Saili Udas Makika to please come and have your comments. Yes, please.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Chattopadhyay. Thank you, IMPRI. And I would like to first congratulate Dr. Xuefei Ren for her paper, her book. I have not read your book. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Yes. So I haven't read your book, but I would definitely like to read it. And from your presentation, I have a few questions to ask you. A little bit of a background. I'm the urban lead at Observer Research Foundation, which is a leading think tank in India. And I've been to China on 4 occasions from 2010 to 2020, and I have observed the urbanization trends for the past 10 years. And I have visited many of your cities and also the neighboring cities. So I have, since you have spoken about the hukou, there was this whole phenomenon of Cheng Shi-bing, which is the big city illness that happened in 2017, when we saw a lot of people, using the hukou, being pushed out of the bigger cities like Shanghai and Beijing. And this was one phenomenon. The second was where, Professor Sridhar mentioned about ghost cities. I saw Pudong myself, and I saw how, Pudong was, which was built next to, I think, Shanghai, and I saw lesser people there. And so somewhere after interacting with the stakeholders there, we also interacted with the government. I got a feeling that there is some sort of subversion towards creation of mega cities. Is that true? And I also read so one thing I would definitely like to know from you, is there a subversion in the Chinese urbanization model in building mega cities? Because that is how the capping is happening, and you're trying to push out population in 19 different provinces, if I'm not wrong. So that is one thing I would like to know from you. Also, I remember in 2014, Premier Xi Jinping had put forth China's new type of urbanization plan. And it was supposed to be a 2014-2020 plan, where, of course, they did not talk about hukou as open as that, but they definitely talked about reverse migration. So some thoughts on that. And the third important thing, which I am not sure if you have mentioned in your book, but anyone who is Indian and visits a Chinese city is taken about by the grandeur. But the second thing that is very important that we see as Indians is the whole smart phenomenon or tech cities. So like I've visited Hangzhou, I've visited Yangzhou, and everywhere, we just see that everything is so tech. So is this, and we have our smart city mission with 100 cities going smart, and many of the technologies being picked up from the Chinese, examples. Anything that you have mentioned about, I would like to know your interventions or your thoughts on tech cities, considering India is really looking at smart city mission in a big way. Thank you. I won't take much time. We are short of time.
Thank you, Ms. Ali. And now just I request Mr. Samir Unale, sir, if you please have your comments. So,
yeah, so I think and thank you much for thank you very much for this opportunity. I think as a we always say that administrator is more of a sociologist in action, and the opportunity to interact with diverse interpretation is always a great experience. And so thank you, Dr. Xuefei Ren, for a wonderful exposure for us into how the Chinese phenomena of the cities and urbanization is evolving. I personally, in college, when we studied political science or sociology, we always talked of comparative public administration, Fredericks being one of its major exponent. And it is quite a delight really to learn as to how the various cultural, ecological, environmental backdrops influence the administration and influence the way the cities and other city governments really evolve. So thank you very much for that. I really had to really talk on one issue exactly. I mean, very specifically, because it's a long time. I would like to be more brief, as clerks anyway are supposed to be. Regarding in fact, the point was raised very well by Shaili as to we always feel that cities for whom is a basic question. Are we just buildings and roads and technology is not city per se, it is the people who live in them. And what could be the, considering your experience into various parts of the world, what according to you could be the best strategies for having inclusive and sustainable cities? Thank you. Thanks a lot.
So thank you. And just to add to all the discussants and panelists' questions and comments, let me just put my questions. I have one specific question, like from the literature, it has been observed that both types of urban governance, like the associational forms or the territorial modes of governance, the way you have put it, both these types of urban governance, they have encountered serious failures in achieving more equitable and just outcomes in terms of, say, urban land transactions, in terms of housing, in terms of air pollution, in terms of access to basic services, and so on. So then the question is, then what is needed to attain a fairer outcomes in urban land and China? For example, this is also related to the questions which already posed by Mr. Samir Unale. So, or precisely, so are any kind of hybrid forms of associational and territorial modes of governance possible? So it's over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, thank you for your excellent questions and suggestions. I think many of your questions and comments are overlapping, and I see a lot of overlaps. I think China and India are almost the opposite when it comes to urban governance. And if you have a picture of a spectrum, most countries would be somewhere in the middle, a hybrid or a mixture of territorial and associational approach. So for China, it's been asked what can the two countries learn from each other. I think the answers are quite obvious. For China, they really need to open up more space for non-state actors. It can be private industries, can be civil society groups to operate. For now, in the last 7 years under Xi Jinping's rule, that sphere for a non-state sector has shrunk so much. So IPE, Carla mentioned IPE, which is a very powerful environmental NGO, but still it can't say things that trouble the government, because if it criticizes the government, then the NGO will be shut down. So so China need to open up more space for non-state actors. And for India, I think it doesn't probably need research. Really, one of the first steps is to empower local institutions. It can be municipal governments, but also it can be other actors that have a strong influence on urban affairs. So I think both China and India should move to the middle of the spectrum and have a like hybrid approach to things. And then for cities' comment on subversion to megacities, your observation is absolutely correct. So last October, Xi Jinping wrote an article in a party magazine called 求是, and he wrote that from now on, we shouldn't put more, the megacities are already too big. We should really start building medium and small sized cities. So now the emphasis is on smaller places. And for hukou reform, there is no restriction. So for small cities, rural residents can get hukou very easily. There's no, they don't need to qualify. So I'm from Northeast, a city about 8 million people. It's called Harbin. It's the provincial capital, but for the rural residents in the province, if they want to get an urban hukou in Harbin, they can get it in a month. It's very easy. So the door has opened, but only for second, third, and fourth tier cities. And for smart cities, to be very honest, I don't understand what's so smart about smart cities. I don't even know what smart means. It's true that most Chinese are cashless. So when they do a payment, they take out their phone. But is that very smart? I don't know. It's true that technology has changed, and so I think there are just so many concerning sides about being smart. For example, surveillance. So there are cameras now. It's facial recognition for even entering the classroom. I think I see a lot of troubling signs in China. There's just so much data the government has about people's lives, credit card to who they had dinner with. The government knows just too much. I think that's not a good direction to go. And then the last question is very important: cities for whom? Well, we all know the right answer. Cities should be inclusive, especially for the vulnerable populations. But if you look at China, there are basically two types of cities. The mega cities, the top tier cities, are for the elites. The government is very clear that low income, low education migrants, they're not welcome in Beijing, in Shanghai, in Shenzhen. But they can go to smaller places. So there are two castes of cities in China. The big cities are for the elite, and then for the rest of the places, that's for everybody. So that's the direction the country is heading. And it's not good, but nobody can be in power forever. Hopefully with the next administration, things can change. So thank you for your comments and suggestions.
So thank you. Now, just I move over to Dr. Arjun, who is the director of IMPRI. So Arjun, it's over to you.
Yes, and sir, I think we can also go one more round if Professor Xuefei also allow to have some more comments also from Professor Kala and Sally ma'am, because they are really the expert. I am also now a China-India Visiting Scholars Fellow at Ashoka University and attached with Tongji University and others. So I'm trying to learn from you all. And just on the part that we really talked about that of our cities, especially the mega cities, been exclusionary. I have really worked a lot on urban issues, housing with Amitabh Kundu. And time and again, for the story of Asia, I would say, because his research work has really emulated from the point of view of Asia, and rightly so, the macro picture. And he has been arguing that our mega cities really is exclusionary. And since our mega cities also dominates in all of our structures, so exclusionary urbanization. Very interesting work, Professor Xuefei. I will try to share that with you. But one major point which I really thought, since we are also talking, because we are also now in the pandemic time zone and era, so a lot of things are also changing for urban governance as well. So one thing on a very macro level, since you are really in USA, I was thinking that what do you think the urbanization process of Asia per se? A lot of literature, leadership, and everyone has focused that 21st century is of Asia. And urbanization is one of the driving force, I would say, other than industrialization. Most of the world's growth, be it Britain, Europe, or even America, has been dominated by industrialization. But now, with the onset of service sector, the urbanization really plays a very vital role. And we really calculate our urbanization rate by the amount of population we have in our urban areas. But I really think what China has demonstrated over the years, that quality or investment or per capita income and other things are also, those things also matters. I see a lot of Chinese people, also people here in India, those who are in metro, really aspiring to go to US for their education. Even their parents are supporting being alone back home there. And not only USA, I would say, that would be biased, but also to the world capitals, London and others. China really have a lot of mega cities, which really excites US citizens, or I would say Europe. They really look forward to it. But I would really like to go back to what Ms. Sally was raising, a very pertinent point. On the front of tech, we all know in our economic theory and concept, we now know that knowledge, innovation, technology, these are the things which drive the economic growth. And cities, as we see, as an engine of growth. So I really had a very good opportunity to also meet with, in Europe, we have a Lubian city in Slovenia as a smart city model, hub of innovation, startup, many things. Ma'am, what do you think for our sustainable urbanization? And ma'am, I was also really being very hopeful by the Habitat 3, between 2 decades that urbanization conference happened. So I really thought that there'll be a lot of push towards Asia for urbanization and being inclusive for towards all of the world, that there will be some push, some investment and many things. But I would say, ma'am, in your experience, what should we all have so many of best practices model, and the issue is of scale. And I would say that this issue has been for quite some long time. I think since I have been born, and since I have learned ABCD or my learning, I have got to know this feeling that the scale is the issue. Scale is the issue. Why I'm saying this, because India and China being the most populous countries, the scale has been the issue and it is prolonging. What should we unlearn, or what should we not do, given the world experience? So this was one of the question for both China and India, learning from urban governance. What should we not do? Or what are the best bad practices we should avoid? Really, I thought that's something if you can share from the experiences of other countries. And other than that, one problem, many of the issues Kala ma'am also really raised of rental housing, vacant properties, ghost properties, ma'am, you really touched. That has also been the phenomena of our mega cities and its periphery. 30%, 40% occupancy level, very low. But as you mentioned that over a period of time, when we see, be it 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, it get fills up. And then the nearer cities get built up. So there is a gestation lag. Me being as an economist, also Dr. Soumyadip Chattopadhyay, one of the important element for us is time. For economics, really, what do you think? And since most of the urban project, be it housing or infrastructure, one of the most important thing is the gestation period of the infrastructure. You really take a time. If you have a redevelopment project or a greenfield project, a brownfield project, all these things takes a lot of time, energy, institution. So what do you think our planning processes or practitioner should really keep in a view in their mind, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, to do the things? Because China has really demonstrated and impressed all, I would say, most of the countries around the world to do its and also implement its infrastructure capabilities, and also BRI and so many push also China is having. What do you see now? Also people talk that China is exporting urbanization. What are your views? And related to that, one other issue which comes up is of financing. How do we make the financing of our cities, because there is really inequality which is getting cropped up time and again. What do you see should be, especially in this post-COVID world? Should property tax or wealth tax, so many things people are now also talking about. And China has really demonstrated that the mayors or leadership can get a lot of investment. Our part of country has not been able to. I would say all of the South Asia has not been able to do it in a very local, decentralized manner. So what are your suggestions regarding that? And now most of the project, because of the pandemic and other thing, is being further delayed. So really our government also, apart from the smart cities and tech and other parts, Salim, I'm really, by the way, Observer Research Foundation is really the #1 think tank in India, I would say also in South Asia, really touches upon in all this part at a very high level. So tech part really comes in. And but two important component, our government and also in policy formulation which came. One was the ease of living index, looking upon the quality of life. Infusing competition to our cities, we also constructed some indexes, and others have also component of air pollution and others. And the other was ease of doing business, looking into also the investment and well-being part. These two very important component. I have also experienced and read that China is also focusing on both these issues very strongly for our strong economic development for both of our countries. Uh, and apart from that, I really thought to touch upon that. What are your views on gentrification in both the countries, especially in our main core mega cities, and your views regarding the real estate industry per se? In our part of the country, really the real estate has been not been in a good shape. What do you see the real estate sector, because that really drives in China going forward for this decade? And I had some comment regarding property operation and maintenance issue, because cities new investment come, but operation and maintenance really becomes an issue as there is more and more people coming in. That is why I was asking the question of financing. And the role of civil societies and NGOs, ma'am, you really said that it has a lot of impact. Uh, in our view, or also in practitioners' view, the role is very limited. it is, I would say, much more of a noise, but very less of impact as it could have been. But I really see the role of academicians like Professor Kala or yourself giving your time and effort to such important issues for emerging powers, especially most emerging urbanized part of our world, and in enlightening all of us. I will stop there. Soumyadip sir, would you like to add anything?
No. I think the list is already very big, and I request Professor Ren to answer and choose your questions, and please.
Ma'am, you can
Okay.
also choose to answer. We will connect you to all our panelists. You can take forward all these things also in our email.
Yes.
Yes, Professor.
Thank
Yes.
you. I will be super brief because it's very late for all of you, especially for Zimin in China. It's close to midnight. So I think I will address your questions from a personal angle. So I'm in my early 40s. So I spent 20 years in China, 3 years in Japan, and then 20 years, almost 20 years in the United States. So after college, people in China really looked to Japan and also to the US for good practices. And to some extent, that's still true today. But in the last year, 2020, I think a lot of things have changed. If you look at how different countries have managed the pandemic, there are so many good things to learn from Singapore, from India, from China, even though it's an authoritarian country. So I think when we think about what to learn and what to unlearn, it's probably it's more useful to look at a lot of different places. The shocking example is if Dharavi can successfully contain COVID-19, why can't the United States? Why every day in the US we still have more than 200,000 new COVID-19 cases? So it's a major governance failure in the United States. And also, if you look at what happened yesterday in Washington, D.C., it's an embarrassment. So my point is, I think it's, at least for people from Asia, it's a habit to look to the West for best practices, but maybe I think there are new situations, and when we think about best practices, maybe we can also look at the global South. There are many best practices in terms of governance, especially on how to contain the pandemic. And India can offer many lessons for other countries to learn, and so is China. And of course, if we want bad examples, experiences we don't want to have, we can find many of those as well. So that's how I see that's how I see the current situation. The models for good governance are probably or should be found not in Europe, not in the United States, and Asia has really demonstrated very strongly what good governance is. And for some of the other points from Arjun, gentrification, real estate, I can send you an email with very detailed response, but in general, I think we should be very careful with the vocabulary. For example, gentrification. It's a little bit misleading to use terms or concepts that originated in the West. For gentrification, the term was invented in London, and then it matured in New York, Soho. So it has a very different history. So when we use terms like gentrification to describe slum redevelopment or what happens after slum redevelopment, it can cause a lot of confusion, at least for me. There are other things. There is inequality, there is gentrification, there is also segregation. But in each country, each context, those things take so different forms. So for me, I just constantly have to remind myself to use very precise words to capture what's really going on the ground. So I wouldn't call urban village redevelopment or slum redevelopment as examples of gentrification. It's totally something else. Well, thank you. I don't want to take more time. It's you should go to bed. It's my early morning here, but it's too late for you. Thank you for your questions.
So thank you. Maybe we just request our panelists to have them make their comments within 1 minute, just before wrapping it up.
I think we can start with Prala ma'am.
Prala ma'am, yes.
Yes, please.
Okay, just
a
one
minute
final.
or so.
Yeah, just one quick final thing I wanted to say is that India and China, we still have a lot of urban poverty. So that's the reason why I said the environmental Kuznets curve needed a little bit more discussion in your book, because there's a trade-off between industrial development, jobs, and the environment, right? That trade-off, I think, is really very important. But I don't think we are at a point where we can say the environment is important and so we'll abandon industrial development altogether. So I think that balance we need to, strike somewhere, and that's a tricky decision. Thanks.
Well, thank you, and over to Dr. Ziming Lee. So if you want to make any quick comment, quick point.
Ziming, yes.
Ziming,
please unmute.
Please unmute.
Okay, so thank you for your organization, and I participate several, and it's helped me to learn what is the gap, research, and also people's understanding about the world, especially in the context of the pandemic. Right now is a post-pandemic phase in Wuhan, and I'm thinking if we focusing on some particular point here happening in Wuhan's governance, and then let's say other cities could learn from Wuhan, and then we can see the trend of urban governance. Like we know some good experience. Also, we have some license that some other countries and cities could avoid that. And I hope we can develop more future collaborations. And also I received someone sent me a message that Chinese and Indian scholars, we need to work together, no matter where we are and no matter what's the time zone.
Yes, Ziming, we are waiting for it. Yes.
So thank you. Over to Ms. Aili.
Dr. Ren, thank you so much for your, I would say you don't very often come across people from your region who very openly talk about issues, and I should congratulate you for that, because there is a kind of a hold back many times, and I would definitely appreciate the way you have actually made us understand about some issues. So that is definitely appreciative. Just one comment is that you mentioned just now in your closing remark that that China, and I think many times India, we try to follow a Western model of development in every way. So when Deng Xiaoping went to US, I think that's how China started going the Western way, and similarly with experiences in India. So I think that the closing thought that I go with is each country or each place should have its own model of urbanization, and we could learn from each other, and that's where we should really work towards. Thank you.
So thank you, Ms. Pelitz. Now over to Mr. Samir Unnale.
Yeah, I think we have reached a stage where we have to make cities as the principal vehicles of implementing policies, and also a principal vehicle for greater international cooperation, understanding, and collaboration. For primarily the major part of humanity is going to be urban, and let cities be a vehicle also to, increase this international understanding and cooperation. I think at that thought, I will stop at it. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Soumyadip.
Soumyadip, said your comments also.
So thank you. No, thank you. I think we have received a lot of comments, and on behalf of IMPRI, I again congratulate Professor Ren for spending much time with us. And it's really a pleasure. And as you mentioned, like this is the first time that you are sharing your book things with primarily the Indian audience. So we are really thankful for that. And I think many of us really summed it up very well. Like we need to learn and both learn and unlearn a lot of things from China and India. So I hope we can take it forward to some this discussion and all these things. And we have been organizing this city conversation series, and I expect and I request all of you to come and join us to make it more enriching, so that we can make certain important policy suggestions and all these things to the for making the cities more sustainable, more inclusive, more just. Thank you, and yes,
let me also take a half a minute before we go to Xuefei ma'am to give her just a way forward, small brief, 30 seconds or 1 minute. Yes. Yes. So I really wanted to say a few lines that Asia, as being a part of the world, really is plagued with poverty, inequality, and a lot of deprivation. And since in this 21st century, we have also got into this pandemic and other disturbances, I was really worried about the funding part, and I would really like to learn more from Dr. Xuefei that because as we see that between the developed countries and developing countries, the terms of funding is also not equal. We get funding at a very higher rate. And if you see the rate of credit or the rate, it is around 10% here in India. How can we compete with the developed world? So, and that part really I thought, and we also saw that in Europe and other part of the world, countries are also financing their the COVID situation by having green infrastructure funding, green bonds and other things. So a lot of different unequal things, the world is still equal. So how Asia, countries like India and China can also move forward in an equal terms, because really when we talk about equality, inequality, these things also matter. People here doing business or living, we have so much of cost to, then how do we compete? So I really thought having, Kala ma'am and Xuefei ma'am, as an economist, I really see these as a very pertinent issues. Our government are having schemes for MSME, for smart cities and other, even for our housing, we are giving interest subvention subsidy for 6%. Our rate of interest, market rate of interest is 9%, 10%, and we are giving interest subsidy subvention for 6%. Our colleagues, those who are buying home at US, they are giving at their, purchasing house, and what is the rate of interest they are paying for their housing loans? 1%, 2%, 0.5%. So how equal we are in this financing world also going forward, I really thought to push forward, and we would be really glad to have both of our countries, India and China, to be leader for this growth and development, especially because of poverty, human development. We really have to catch up, not only India, China, but also Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, many countries, climate change and other issues also coming. So sorry, I got a bit emotional and carried away. Ma'am, over to you and your concluding remarks, and Soumyadip sir can give a vote of thanks formally.
Well, I don't have much to say. First of all, I just want to say how impressed I am with your IMPRI. When you emailed me last year, I quickly, I agreed. But in the last few days, I was browsing your website, and you are energetic. There's so many events lined up, and this is I hope in the coming months, this year, we can have more discussion, conversations like this. I think this is a perfect example what China doesn't have. China China doesn't have initiatives like what you are doing, IMPRI. So there's a lot to learn from each other. And so I will be a regular in 2021. I will log in as much as possible for your online webinars. And thank you for today's
Thank you.
panel.
Thank you. So thank you. Thanks for your appreciation.
Before pandemic, we also used to have a lot of offline or, the general webinar across the our country, north, south, and also in South Asia, in collaboration with the local partners in Bangladesh, other places, all the parts. So we hope that this pandemic gets over very soon and we get over the webinar mode also. It's also very tiring.
So yes. Thank you. No, thank you. So I have nothing. So we just look forward to many more similar discussion. Thank you. Thank you so much once again from our side. Thank you. It's very good night.
Yes. Have a nice day.
Okay.
And good night. Thank you
Good
so
night.
much. Yes. Good night, Professor Kala.
Good night and thank you.
Good night.
Kalawan, thank you for staying up.
Good night, everybody.
And
Thank
all the
you.
panelists. Yes.
Thank
Thank you, Samir sir. Yes. Thank you.